So I'm just going to introduce Dr. Jo Arthurs, who's going to speak to us about creating and updating that elusive thing known as a CV. Over to you, Jo.
Hi everyone, hope you can hear me okay. So as Serena said, my name's Jo Arthurs and welcome to my dining room. I'm a GP partner at Newthorpe Medical Centre and also a locality tutor with the Phoenix Progamme in Nottingham. And today I'm going to talk to you about CVs. I must apologise, I'm fairly new to the whole Zoom webinars, so it might not be as interactive as earlier presentations, but please do keep to put questions in the chat and the Q&A. I've been asked to do this as someone who's not long ago sat where you were now, so having finished my training back in 2018. And if I'm honest, it was really only as I was finishing GP training and kind of applying for my HEAM fellowship did I really, sorry I can't, my screen now won't move. Excellent. There we are. Okay, but sorry about that. That as I was applying for my HEAM fellowship, did I really start thinking about putting my CV for general practice together. But since then, I've used it quite a lot, applying for new roles and positions, and it's really been a beneficial thing. So why are we talking about CVs today? It's a really important topic, as many of you will need one as you're kind of looking for jobs and you come out of training. It's often a source of anxiety for many trainees, and I think that's probably because it's not something that we really teach during training. And we recently did a survey to finishing trainees locally, and trainees themselves actually identified this topic as something that they wanted more guidance on. And lastly, I think it's often something that we leave to the last minute, which then makes it quite daunting and stressful when you have kind of years of records and information to find and look through. So we'll talk a bit about managing that. So it's important to remember that this is the first opportunity you will have to sell yourself to an employer. So it's a snapshot of your career to date, designed to help employers decide whether or not to invite you for interview. Another way of seeing it is a bit like a shop window, showcasing kind of your attributes, your skills, your personality, and showing them what you can do. So over the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to discuss why a CV is important and what specifically employers are going to be looking for, the key headings and components required to make a clearly presented, concise and accurate CV, which is what we want. And we're going to just touch on discussing the differences between CVs for different roles. So what are senior partners and employers looking for when they look at a CV? So what I did here is I messaged a few senior colleagues who regularly look at CVs and asked them this question. And key points they mentioned included whether they thought the candidate would kind of fit in with the practice ethos, what they were like away from work. Someone mentioned kind of looking for items which they could discuss further in interview. And another mentioned about being intrigued to meet the person after reading their CV. So I think it's important to keep these things in mind as we progress and look at how we're then going to create our CV. I think it's really important to remember that a CV it's a personalised sales brochure for you. And it's important to remember that there's no set format for constructing the perfect CV. Even experts that do this on a day in, day out basis will all disagree on how one should be constructed. But despite this, we can give you help to explore how to get started with your CV and offer tips to create an effective document. So firstly, I'd just say, make sure you prepare early and don't just start writing it. Some effective thinking and preparation work before is really worth the time invested in helping you create an effective document later on. So you'll claw that time back. Tailor it. So highlight the skills that are relevant and tailored to the job in question. So I think Andy mentioned this before. So one trick that people say is to create like a generic CV on Excel, which has kind of everything in there. And then you can kind of later come and cherry pick details from that and then create a specific CV for each job that you apply for. It is really, really important that you kind of read the job description and specification and ensure your CV is individualised to meet those criteria. And that's things that certain jobs pick up on. Other tips just mentioned there include just making sure you sound like yourself, ensure it's easy to read and there's a clear structure. So in terms of structure, I just want to point out that the following is a guide as to the types of headings you may choose to put on your CV. You really do need to kind of use your own judgment as to which headings you want to include, modify, and which way you choose to order your information. So always start though with your personal information. Okay, so this is the start of your CV. And stuff to includes your full name, your date of birth, and contact details. So an appropriate email address, and I would recommend like an NHS one or a doctors.net one, a suitable phone number, and your home address. And personally, I would always include my GMC number. Some people include things like their memberships, and some people put a photograph, but that again is a personal preference. Things you don't have to put in are things like your gender, your marital status, whether you have children, your nationality. Again, some people prefer to do that, and that's fine. Some people like to offer a profile or an opening paragraph on their career intentions, so think listing kind of specific skills or interests, etc. And this is quite useful for kind of driving home your enthusiasm and suitability for the current position. It's a personal preference, and some people like it and others don't. So I have it, I have one on mine, but I think you might have to just think about what you prefer. So just here, this is a CV example that I found from a HEAM document. And with this, I know I would normally make this a bit more interactive, but I just want to highlight things that I personally think could be improved. So looking at this, first I would say it's on rubbish paper and you can see right through it, so make sure you put your CV on a good piece of paper. It's a very long list. I think there's 18 lines in total, and I would worry that this is not a really good effective use of space. So I think maybe shortening that. It's quite cluttered, they're all quite close together, and I think it's quite difficult to read overall. It's not that well ordered, so you've got your address, but then your telephone number at the bottom, after your Hep B immunisation. It just doesn't kind of seem to flow. And much of the information is irrelevant, so if you've got your date of birth, why would you need your age? It's all in bold, and I think that just looks a bit standoutish. And you might be able to see that the word curriculum vitae is at the top. And actually, if you're handing someone a piece of paper with all your details on it, I'm pretty sure that's quite self-explanatory and serves little purpose. This person has included 3 telephone numbers, and I'm not sure I think that's necessary. Last thing I just wanted to draw your attention to on this is the email. So it's not the most appropriate email to include, so just again, make sure you're using your nhs.net or a doctor's one or something that's more professional than that is. So this is an alternative. As you can see, it's a lot shorter. It provides kind of the essential information, uses minimal space, and mixes bold and ordinary text, which makes it look a little bit more clearer and more presentable. It's much easier to read, and I think it's a lot neater. Now, you could need more information. I mentioned things like your GMC number, but that's just a basic of just how much more presentable you can make that. So the next heading I would consider putting in is your qualifications, so your professional qualifications. So start in reverse chronological order, and considering you're at the end of your training, I think your RCGP is going to be up there. If you haven't finished, make sure that you kind of split up and put the AKT and the CSA in there. So put the date you may have passed your AKT and the mark, and then with regard to your CSA, you can put kind of that it's pending and when it's scheduled in, because it's good for employers to know that it's likely you will be finished. You could also put other specialty specific qualifications, so such as DFSR8 or DCH in there, and put dates. Add your primary medical qualification, and then also any kind of other prizes or awards that you have achieved at university. So make sure you put in kind of your institution, so where you went to uni, all the awarding bodies and the dates you got these things, okay? It's a bit of a personal preference as to whether you want to include kind of education such as your A-levels. If you do use those, I would say maybe group them and don't put a whole reel of them. So maybe just like, 4 A-levels in this. I suppose I was thinking of when that might be relevant. I suppose if you were applying abroad, say a French-speaking country, and they wanted to know that you could speak French, that might be quite important, say you had a French A-level. So next is clinical experience. Some people also call that professional experience, work history, or medical employment. I think include job titles, location, dates of employment, and again put these into reverse chronological order. And it can be useful to offer kind of key achievements in the role in a couple of sentences or bullet points. But if you do that, do make sure it's kind of focused and relevant. And last thing I just wanted to make sure with you, that you're aware of with your clinical experience, a bit like when you fill out job application forms, it always asks you about kind of gaps in your employment. So make sure if there are any gaps that you highlight these and say, give reasons, because otherwise that could be a bit of a red flag and something that an employer could then bring up in an interview, or mean that you don't get an interview. Next, we will go on to show kind of your CPD, so courses and training experiences. However, if you do look online, you will see that depending on why you're writing your CV for what sort of job and the length and detail you want it, you may have kind of CPD courses and conferences as all separate headings. But if you don't have so many or it's not as relevant for you, then maybe put it into one heading. Make sure you include specialty-specific training or courses that are relevant. So if you've done a joint injection course, really only write that if you're interested in doing joint injections and stuff like that. So out-of-date or irrelevant courses are not particularly useful and they clutter what you want to say. Make sure you include dates and details of each achievement, and the general advice is not to list any CPD activities that are about over 5 years old, just because they start becoming less relevant and get repeated. Following on from that, it's prudent to kind of discuss further academic work. So this would include things like publications, research, audits, quips, and teaching experience. So under these headings, I would list and or give brief explanations of the work you have undertaken or participated in. So again, dates and stated these have been submitted to kind of professional journals, if they've been published, presented, and if that's either locally, nationally, or even internationally. With regard to teaching experience, list and give a brief description of your teaching and training activities. And these are ones that you've taught and trained others on. So this is especially useful if there is a teaching element in the role you're applying for. So that's something to highlight if that's something you really want to share. And don't forget to leave hooks of info if this is something you really want to discuss further in interview. So, you know, really make it stand out that that's something that you're proud of. On my CV, I actually have that whole section subdivided into 3 sections. So I grouped publications and research together, management of change, which was my quips and my audit, and I then had a separate section for teaching experience. Plan this section well, because it's quite easy to repeat yourself with this section. So make and give the same kind of learning points and actions. So to avoid doing that, kind of plan that and get it all down on paper before you submit it. When I was writing this, I actually came across a useful method which can be used to help with writing evidence in your CV. So something called the CAR method, and it's a helpful way of making sure your responses are focused and relevant and easy to read on your CV. So it's context, action, and result. So context, so first of all, you need to put the situation into context. So briefly describe the situation so that the example can be clearly understood by your assessors. So, and avoid giving that in too much detail. Action, state what action you actually took. And when I mean that, not what the group took, they want to know what you said. So avoid we if talking about the situation in a team context. They just want to know specifically what your contribution, what your difference that you made was. And then the result. So describe the outcome. So what were the positive outcomes from it? What learning points did you have? What reflections did you make on the situation? And they're sort of things just to carry forward. So it was just one example I just wanted to show you. So someone's written about an audit here, and they've put develop literature review with 2 senior colleagues to compare the hospital's policy on ulcerative colitis with current research. Policy modified as a result and then presented at the departmental meeting. So you can see there, nice and brief, but gives a really good overview of what they've done. Other possible headings could include practical skills and other achievements. So use these sections to highlight really specific skills, competencies or abilities, including kind of management and leadership roles which are relevant to your application. The penultimate section would be to discuss your kind of personal or general interests or any other relevant additional information or achievements. And these are things that make you unique, that will add value to your CV and will show your employers who you are. So if we remember back to an earlier slide about what employers were looking for, they wanted to know about the potential employee and colleague. They wished to get a feel if they would fit in with the team. They wanted to know what you were like away from work. So this is the section where you can tell them that. This can be very important in terms of whether you get invited for interview. And also in this day and age, we know it's really, really important that we have a good balance between our work and our home life. As without this, there's lots of evidence to say that we're likely to get burnt out. And so that is really important to an employer that you show you have this. Personally, I chose to write this section in prose, just because I think it's more personable, but you could write it in bullet points if you wanted to. Finishing off, you want to put your references at the end. 2 references are needed generally. I would advise, if you're applying out of training, that one should be either your educational supervisor or another person with responsibility for your education. Make sure kind of you include their full name, an address for them, and that can be a practice address, a telephone number, an email, and then also put what their relationship, so if they are your educational supervisor, write that. And one thing that always looks better is if you make sure you've contacted them beforehand and make sure they're happy to and willing to give you a supportive reference, because we've got a few references before at the practice and they've not been favourable, and I can't imagine why someone would choose a reference that wasn't favourable. Okay, I just wanted to briefly talk about CVs being targeted for different roles. So don't forget that CVs are often measured against selection criteria. So again, as Andy said, read the person's spec and job description and ensure that your CV addresses all of the desired competencies. If you're applying for a salaried position, it's important to strike a balance between clinical and management experience. However, ensure you highlight how you work effectively as part of an MDT, as this is likely to be important for the employer, as is your willingness potential to maybe take on management roles in the future. So for partners, if you're applying for a partnership, showing management experience and skills on your CV is likely to be even more important than clinical experience. However, if you are newish to GP and feel you might not have the most management experience, I think it's really important to say, acknowledge this and that you understand that this is part and parcel of the role you're applying for, and show that kind of you have skills and that you're willing to learn and develop these skills moving forward. So even though you might not have all the management side of things, there are other ways of selling it and putting it into your CV. And lastly there, if you're applying for a locum post, it's likely that your CV will be shorter. The employer would be interested to know probably where you've worked before and your level of experience, but also be very prepared to be flexible and to be able to amend your CV for each post. I think it's really important. So final points. I thought I'll leave this to the end because everyone's going to ask me this question. The length of your CV. So average, it says between 2 and 3 pages. And if someone's kind of scan reading it, it should take approximately 2 minutes for them to do that. So you can always do a proof check. At the absolute most, it should be no more than 5 pages. And that would be really dependent on whether you're applying for a more academic position. So generally, mine's about 3 pages. Ensure it's clearly presented and formatted. So roughly font size 11 to 12, fairly simple text such as Arial or Times New Roman. And my husband told me to mention that we have to make sure you format it so it fills the whole page. Ensure you give it to someone to proofread and check spelling and grammar before you submit it, because that doesn't look that great. Keeping up to date. You guys are really good at this because you've done portfolios and everything, but every month or so, just make sure you update a master copy with kind of new courses or qualifications. It's so much easier and it saves you so much time in the long run. Okay. And Andy mentioned about a cover letter, so I just put that in as a little point. Personally, I'm a fan. The roles I've got, I always included it if I could, and I think it makes an employer feel special. It says how your skills specifically meet their needs and gets across to them your personality and motivations for applying to this specific role, which you might not be able to do in your CV. So thank you very much. I hope that was helpful. Just wanted to mention that there is a good example, although it's slightly different headings to what I talked about today, that eMedica have up on their website. So it's a good starting point if you're looking at creating one from scratch. If you Google eMedica GP CV, this will come up, and there are others as well, but this is just, I think it's Dr. Any Doctor, and it just gives you a space you can populate. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jo. That was really helpful. I've got a couple of questions, but because time is pressing, what we'll do is we'll pick those up in the Q&A section at the end. So I'm going to now pass you over to Gemma Wilkinson and Gail Walton. Gemma and Gail lead the New to Practice programmes for Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire respectively. So over to you.
Hello everybody, and thank you for staying with us this far. This is the last section of the programme, and it's really all about the support available for GPs working in the East Midlands. And during this talk we're going to be focusing on the help that you can access now and over the next few months and years. But actually our aspiration really is that you'll have support available to you throughout your general practice career. So my name's Gemma Wilkinson and I work as a GP at Nottingham, and I'm also the educational lead for the Phoenix Progamme, which is part of Nottinghamshire LMC. And as an organisation, we aim to provide workforce support for all GPs working within the county. And over the next 20 minutes, you'll also be hearing from my colleague, Dr. Gail Walton, who is the lead for New to Practice GPs in Derbyshire as part of the GP Task Force. And similarly, the GP Task Force offers workforce support for all primary care staff across Derbyshire. But I think that really importantly, our unified message to you as our colleagues is that we're here to support you. And I suppose that's where this title of You'll Never Work Alone has sort of arisen from. So we're all currently, bear with me, we're all currently living and working through these challenging times. It's not gone unmentioned this afternoon about the COVID pandemic. And a highlight of my lockdown has been watching and photographing this little family of blue tits in this blue tit nest in my back garden. And in this picture, one of the parents, I think it's probably the male, is just flown out of the nest and is off to find some food for the young. But one of the real delights of watching this little family was as they started to get a bit older and a bit more confident, they start poking their heads out of the nest. And at the start, they just do this really briefly, and then they return back to the safety of the nest. But gradually, they spent longer looking out and realising that there was a world out there that they were ready to explore and ready to leave that nest. And I suppose in many ways, it just reminded me of all sorts of seminal moments that we all have in life, and that you have had, you know, in the recent past, in the not so recent past, you know, going back to when you left home, when you started work. In fact, really recently, you know, every time you change specialty or change job, and again, now you're facing the next sort of big moment, aren't you, if you like, of getting ready to start work post-training. Because it can feel a bit daunting, leaving that familiar, sort of relatively protected environment of your training practice to start work as an independent practitioner. And I guess some days it might seem quite anxiety provoking. Other days, perhaps if you're trying to sort out how you're going to do the exam, writing another e-portfolio entry, you actually might be quite looking forward to your training finishing. And what I didn't know about blue tits until I started reading up about them is that they stay within that family group for a couple of weeks after they leave the nest, and those young birds have the opportunity to have that sort of transition into fending for themselves whilst being supported by their family group. And we hope that the New to Practice support locally will aim to do the same for you. So let's just go on to the next slide. So you'll see the heading of this slide is New to Practice Fellowship, and we thought it was really important to explain about the terminology because it might be confusing. This is the title of a new national scheme for all newly qualified GPs across the country. So we have no choice over the name, and I say it might be confusing because up until now, GP fellowships really referred to quite a specific type of role, I think, which was available just to a few individuals where they had an opportunity perhaps to pursue an area of special interest or get a qualification, and they were employed to do some clinical work alongside doing that project work, whatever it might be. But now the focus has shifted to provide a universal offer. So New to Practice Fellowship is available for all. And it's with all GPs within the first 2 years post CCT, and it's got these three main areas of support, so induction, mentoring and peer support. And the exact way the schemes run across Notts and Derby varies a little bit, but the important message is that no matter where you work locally, you're going to get good support. So in terms of induction, both the Phoenix Progamme and GP Task Force websites, on the websites you'll find links to written induction materials, and we've posted these links earlier today and happy to post those again. And in the words of a colleague who was sitting in your shoes about 2 years ago, who read them recently actually, she said they're brilliant and contain everything that you need to know when you're leaving training and starting work. So that was quite a good bit of feedback. And I suppose in addition, we're also looking to collaborate to commission some podcasts, which will support those written materials, in particular giving you some information about the current landscape in general practice in terms of perhaps organisations involved, how they connect with each other nationally, locally, and also particularly in the context of COVID. Mentoring. I'm going to mention this briefly, and Gail will talk a little bit more detail about it in a minute, but we're really lucky in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire to have a service called GPS mentoring, which many of you may have heard of, and that's available to you throughout your career. And then the support. So I suppose really an overarching part of the whole New to Practice years is support. Interestingly, it links to some of the things that came up earlier in that word cloud that you created yourselves, and also the question James asked early on in his talk about the sort of feeling more independent but also less protected, and less supervision and support. So it's not the same as you've had with your training, but actually you are still supported. And I think wherever you work across Notts and Derbyshire and Lincolnshire, you will still feel supported. So I'll just talk briefly about that in Nottingham and then hand over to Gail, who's going to carry on and talk about the support in Derbyshire and then support more broadly. So if you work in Nottingham and you register with the Phoenix Progamme, you'll be offered some tailored career advice if required, signposted to any portfolio opportunities that might be available either now or in the future. And that's probably something that's really important right now. And again, linking back to surveys we did on the themes that came out at the beginning of this afternoon, is that if you're worried about seeking work, please get in contact with us, and us with the LMC will try and support you. Andy mentioned vacancies on the LMC websites, which is a great way to start, but sometimes even if you can't see vacancies, please contact us and we will try and help you and seek vacancies for you, even if they've not been advertised, and we're happy to facilitate employment discussions and so on. So send us a CV and get in touch. Another part of the sort of support offer is about peer support, and that's really important for everyone. Someone mentioned something about moving to a new area, from out of area, and of course the peer support would be really important for those people in that situation. So we run monthly educational sessions which are open to all new to practice doctors, and they're on topics chosen based on participant feedback. And the sessions are informal and interactive. And in normal times, not COVID, probably the lunch breaks and the coffee breaks are as important as the CPD content, about fostering that peer support. During COVID, we have had to put them on hold, but we've got a really active WhatsApp group for support, and actually we're restarting our sessions virtually next week. So now I'm going to hand over to Gail to talk in more detail about the support available in Derbyshire and a little more broadly.
Thank you, Gemma. So as Gemma said, and as I hope everybody's gleaned from what's been said so far, across Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, we're very keen to work collaboratively to support GPs at whatever age and whatever career stage they're at. And particularly foremost in our minds at the moment with COVID and your situation as ST3s is supporting you as you're on the cusp of starting your careers. The support, like we said, looks broadly similar across Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. So in Nottinghamshire, it's the Phoenix Progamme through NOTS LMC. And in Derbyshire, we've got the GP Task Force and an arm of that called GP Aspire to help support your careers. Career-long mentoring is available. As Gemma said, GPS is our local mentoring service. It's grown over the years, but initially the concept came out of Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire LMC GPs expressing concern for GPs in the workforce. And that mentoring is now spread and covers a lot of the country. It's on offer for you as ST3s right now and will be through your new practice fellowship years through a channel called Preceptorship. It offers you a number of sessions with a trained GP mentor. And what I think is really important is that your mentor is a GP, but they've been trained and they're available. I can't recommend mentoring highly enough. It's not something for times of crisis or when you hit a low point in your career or your life, but it's about taking the time to look after yourself, to prepare yourself for a long haul through an interesting and varied career, and to use the skills of colleagues locally. There are national schemes also available, and I'm not really going to touch on those at any great length. I've listed them on the slide and there are a lot more available. You can find information on the LMC websites, and you can ring the LMC and ask anonymously for information if you're in need. In other local ways, through the First 5 group, so Derbyshire is very similar to Nottinghamshire. We have a current fellow and we have a First 5 lead with WhatsApp groups and a very active programme. We have a mid-years commitment and retirement, which may seem a long, long way off at the moment, but it's just a facet of what is on offer. We've also got a Derbyshire Educational Network available to all GPs with a programme that's available on our website. And as Gemma has said about Nottinghamshire, we're very much remote working at the moment and have seen some really useful Zoom meetings, high quality content, and certainly food for thought for the future. The fellowship schemes, as Gemma said, the terminology can be confusing. We have run and we hope to run, funding permitting in the future, some schemes that are what we'd term an enhanced offer. So in addition to the 2-year programme that Gemma's outlined, both Phoenix and GP Task Force have supported a number of fellows over the years. They've looked at different clinical and management areas with a particular emphasis on developing leadership skills. So I would encourage you to keep an eye on our website. Everything's been slowed down by the pandemic, but once NHS England sends us more information, that will be out there for you to know about. In my own career, the diversity and the opportunities of work in allied roles to that of a GP has always been a huge attraction to keeping me in primary care. But don't take my word for it. Let's listen to a couple of our new to practice GPs. First of all, I'm going to ask Shella and then Nick. So over to you, Shella.
Hello, I hope this is working. Hi everyone, welcome. I hope you found it a really useful event. I was in your position about a year ago, so I attended the last AIT Transition Conference approximately a year ago, and I CCT'd in August 2019. So currently I'm working as a modern terminology, I suppose, a new word of portfolio GP. So I'm a locum GP. I also do salaried sessions, work for the GMC, and I also do the fellowship, which is what I'm going to go through over the next couple of minutes. So having CCT'd in August 2019, I was offered a GPTF fellowship through the Derbyshire Progamme, which essentially was 2 sessions a week, looking at developing a project, really. So I with the help of very supportive colleagues, developed the HUG programme, which is helping us grow generations of GPs. And this is my fellowship project, which essentially has gone from conception to development and is approaching the end of its pilot phase. It's a longitudinal support network, and it's just looking at the benefits and barriers of such a scheme in helping to recruit and retain GPs in the local area. In terms of benefits for me, I've certainly developed leadership and management skills. We all go on courses as trainees and junior doctors, but it's about putting that knowledge into practice and utilising those skills, but also developing them further. There is an aspect of academic research, so I came from a research background prior to doing medicine, so I work with the GP Academy at the University of Nottingham, and that will allow development of the data to get ready for publication and presentation locally and nationally, hopefully. In terms of the fellowship itself and working on a local level, there's given me lots of opportunity to do community outreach work, particularly during the course of the pandemic, when I've been able to do videos aimed specifically at the South Asian community, and that's been an opportunity that I wouldn't necessarily have got if it hadn't been for the fellowship. And it's also allowed me to develop further opportunities and networks, and everybody touches on the importance of networks, but you do meet so many people through lots of different contacts that you get, and it's really important to nurture and develop those networks to develop your own interests, depending on where you want to go with your own career, so you can develop that further. So hopefully that's a bit about my fellowship. I'm going to hand over to Nick, who is a Nottinghamshire GP fellow.
Yeah, thanks very much, Shella. So nice to meet you guys. My name's Dr. Nicholas Ackham. I'm a salaried GP working over at Nottingham West CCG. And I CCT'd, I think it was actually roughly about this time last year, so as a sort of part-time out of sync GP trainee. I got involved with the fellowship programme fairly early on, so it was quite sort of fledgling around sort of this time last year. I've been mostly involved in the peer support sessions. You can actually see one of the peer support sessions on the slide down below. I think it was one of the more recent ones before obviously the pandemic hit. I just wanted to say it's been a really, really useful opportunity. One of the things I've noticed transitioning from GP training over to sort of a full salary GP is you sort of things kind of get a little bit more narrow in terms of interaction with colleagues. In a good way, you are kind of forced to interact with other GP trainees, but through central teaching and things in terms of placements as well. You kind of lose that when you become sort of a salary GP. You're kind of just more located towards your practice. So the Phoenix Progamme, particularly the peer support elements, is a great way of just catching up with colleagues, providing sort of mutual support towards each other. We've had some incredibly useful sessions talking about some of the practical aspects of appraisal, portfolio working. We've had one of the MD NDU reps coming in to talk about how to manage complaints. So I'd encourage everyone to basically sign up. It's been really, really useful. And I just want to say well done to all the ST3s. I know it's a difficult time at the moment, but it's great being a fully fledged GP, and just make sure you support each other and stay in touch with each other as well. Okay, so I'll hand back to Gail.
Thank you. Thanks, Shella. Thanks, Nick, for that. It's been a bit of a romp through this session because we want to leave time for questions and answers. The underlying message, I think, is you'll never work alone. It might feel like it, but there really is a huge amount of support available. Gemma and myself just want to underline that if something isn't clear, if you're wanting to know about opportunities, or actually you're just wanting that affirmation that it's okay just being a GP. I think we forget sometimes that learning the craft of general practice is huge and consumes vast amounts of energy and time. So actually in those first few years, just inverted commas, being a GP is brilliant. It's a brilliant job. And I'm going to hand over back to Gemma just briefly to see if there are any gaps in what we might have missed out that we can't take in Q&As. Thank you.
Well, thanks everybody. No, I don't think there's anything that we've missed out. I think I would just like to reiterate again, get in touch with us. We're here to help you. You've done this, you know, I know it seems daunting, but you've changed jobs loads of times over the last few years. So you're going to be absolutely fine, but we are here to support you. So please get in touch. And I know we're open to participants who've registered from other areas. So this is a national scheme. So have a look, get in touch with similar going on around the EU. Thank you for listening.
So, firstly, I'm going to take the first question, which is a question from Effie, which is why is partnership not so popular at the moment? So, Andy, if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, I was going to sort of reflect that these things change over time, don't they? Because I remember when I was just finishing my training, the concern people had was that partnerships were less available, and they were still fairly popular actually. And people were worried that the partners wanted to limit partnerships and keep the money for themselves and pay salary GPs less. And then it sort of swung the other way for some time, and I hope that it might swing back in the future. Why is it not popular? I think it's a big commitment. I think, and I think that more flexible ways of working in the early years have become more popular. It's a big commitment. People seem to finish training wanting more experience of other practices and so forth. I can see Christine's hands coming up. Christine?
I'll just keep an eye on everyone. So Christine, if you want to come in.
I was just going to mention, I don't think people have necessarily read the GP contract, but there's going to be a partnership bonus of about £20,000 for anybody joining a partnership after April 2020. The detail isn't that available at the moment because of the COVID arrangements, but I understand the papers have been signed off. So I do think that will make partnership more popular. It's still different, and Andy's described the issues, but that is quite a sizable incentive that people should at least know about.
Absolutely. Andy's going to come back in a session. I know certainly Derbyshire has a partnership development programme because we found out that people weren't necessarily scared of partnership. It was just a lack of knowledge, and they wanted to know more to feel more prepared in order to do it. So anyone interested in doing that within Derbyshire, if you contact the task force, we can let you know when the next cohort is starting. Andy?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's different to the other roles, and I think there is a need for an additional amount of due diligence because it is a bigger sort of legal and potential financial commitment. And I think that's why people have had reservations over the last few years. What I would say is I'm a partner and I really enjoy it. It's enabled me to have a really interesting portfolio career. it actually often unlocks other opportunities that you might be interested in, such as some other roles, like being a primary care network clinical director, and being on the board of the federation and things. It might be more difficult, and in some cases not possible, to do these roles without being a partner. So it really is something definitely worth considering, if not straight out of the blocks from ST3, having it in that career development plan.
Okay, I'm going to move on to another question now, because I'm going to make sure that we try and answer as many questions as possible. So the next question is, I'm interested in key differences between PMS and GMS practices that will be relevant for us as potential employees. Does anyone want to field that one before I give it to Gail? No, that seems a good one for you, Gail.
Right, thanks, Susie. I would say discuss it with somebody who knows what they're talking about contracts. So your LMCs are the best placed people to have that conversation with. You may well have covered it in some teaching, either at your practice level or in your scheme teaching, but I would say have a one-to-one conversation with your LMC. Michael Wright is the exec in Nottinghamshire. David Gibbs is our expert in Derby. So talk to them. I can't cover it, I don't think, in a minute. So yeah, take advice. Good advice is available.
I think it's mainly a question of the practice being right for you, and the contractual bits. Even with contracts for salary GPs, practice should be offering at least as good as the BMA standard contract. Sorry, Christine, did you want to add anything? You're muted.
And I just wanted to reassure Lauren that there's not a massive difference between the practices in Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire at the moment. And the only exception to that would be practices maybe that deal with a lot of homeless patients, that it would be very obvious that they have a very different workload. So maybe in the past there was a difference, but really be reassured there's hardly any difference at the moment.
Great. The next question is, what are your thoughts about taking up a job in a practice that you finished from? Did anyone go straight, on our panel, go straight from their training practice into so Jo, yeah, do you want to come in?
So I actually took the job in the practice that I did my ST1 in, so I carried on. So I kind of found that it was good to go to other practices, but actually, having moved around and done 3 different positions, I actually found that I really enjoyed my ST1 practice, and then looked to do my fellowship there, and then ended up staying on a partner. I know many friends and colleagues that have stayed on after their ST prep after they finished, and that's worked really well for them. I think just make sure you know what's around, that you still look what's available in your area, speak to colleagues. Often people, if they do stay on, at least they've got the capacity of their fellow ST3s that are finishing, that you can at least speak about, how many, the usual, so how many patients you're seeing, what kind of work are you doing. And I think it's just really wise, if you are going to stay on, just to make sure that you know those things, because you won't have the experience of going to different practices.
Great. Anyone else want to comment on that question? No. Christine?
Yeah. I just wanted to say that I think that first year after you've done your CCT is a big time of change, and actually sometimes just taking a job for a fixed term of a year allows you to understand your issues. So don't be scared of taking that job at your training practice or anywhere, but maybe think of it as a year job, and then during that time re-evaluate via the task force or the Phoenix Progamme where you're up to. I think, Jo, you know, lots of people move house, get married, stuff happens, and it does alter your approach.
Great, thank you. I stayed on as a partner at my training practice and thoroughly enjoyed it. I was there for 9 years, and then circumstances and then changing jobs meant that I moved. And I think that's another lesson, is that we've got quite a lot of flux in our careers, and it's quite usual for people to change throughout. So don't feel that, obviously you go into a partnership aiming to stay there for a long time, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that will be the case, because as Christine said, things change. So for those who do locum work at the moment, so I know that's Shella. Is anyone else locuming at the moment besides me? Serena. So for those who do locum work at the moment, how have you found finding locum shifts at the moment? Any tips for finding locum after CCT?
Do you want me to answer that initially? Yeah. So after CCT, I locumed for a bit, and I used several platforms. So there are different online locum agencies. Some are free to sign up to, some you pay an annual fee to sign up to. And they work with practices to advertise work locally. There are many different ones. One that I've used is Lantham. That's just one of many different locum organisations. And essentially you create an account and log on, and some of them are very good at negotiating the rate for you on your behalf. You upload all your details like your CV and your security checks and so on, and you essentially apply for a job, a session, a shift on there, and you get an email back when your shift is confirmed. So I use locuming to get a feel for the practices around me before I decided if I wanted to stay on at a practice as a salary GP, which I subsequently went on to do. Another good way to ask about locum work is essentially just to ask around the local practices, either in person, or you can always email the practice managers of the practices and introduce yourself, say who you are, your level of experience and what you're looking for, and see if they are looking for any locum work, locum doctors that way. The second part of the question was at the moment. So at the moment it has changed significantly for locum doctors. I found several shifts were cancelled because the practice was sort of in a state of suspension, so they didn't necessarily need locum doctors at that time. They were setting up how to work efficiently themselves, and also there was a period when the practices went quite quiet, when everybody stayed at home. Now I think it's getting a bit busier again, and I've seen a little bit more locum work come up on the sites that I use, but that's one change that I've noticed at the moment. I anticipate as things go back to normal, the locum work will reappear.
Just to say that there's Gemma and I put information in the chat, as has Christine. There are some advantages and disadvantages to using agencies. The support from both the Task Force and the Phoenix project in that there are locum support in terms of Derbyshire Medical Chambers and also the roving GP scheme, and that makes sure you're supported as a locum and acts as a virtual practice. Sorry, James, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you very much. So absolutely right. So there are different ways of addressing this, and actually at the moment in the National First 5 group, we're doing an RCGP series on support for locums, of the first of which happened a couple of weeks ago, and you can find the transcript for that and that on the First 5 part of the RCGP. We're also doing one next week on the 10th that may well be helpful about diversifying portfolios and looking to exactly that, about how to get locum work. We had a bit of an expert in the room at that time, and in fact the suspicion is that whilst things are more tricky for locums at the moment, the likelihood is just around the corner things are going to get much better, and in fact there's going to be plenty of work very soon as things start to get rolling again.
And everyone starts to needing their holidays that they've not had. Absolutely. So Gemma, I'm going to come to you for this one. So Sid just asked, where can we find out about fellowships? Are fellowships possible if you're looking to work part-time?
Thanks, Susie. Yes, so I guess just reiterating that point that we made during the last part of the programme, which was that in theory, every one of you will be a fellow. You'll all be new to practice fellows because that's a national programme and that's what they're calling it. What that really means is that you will find your own work, but you will have some support and the induction, mentoring and support. I suspect you were meaning about fellowship in the old sense of the word, the answer is it's a little uncertain at the moment. So we know that funding during COVID has been an issue for some things, and I guess career development is no exception to that. I think what Andy said is really poignant at this point, that this will pass, you know, and so what I would suggest is that you keep your eyes peeled on both the GP Task Force and Phoenix Progamme website. You mentioned about whether or not you could work part-time with a fellowship. Certainly in Nottinghamshire previously, the old style fellowship, if you like, that was one of the possible limitations, was that it really was a full-time post. And actually, so when we're sort of taking learning and moving forward, funding permitting, I guess that's one of the things that we recognise, and actually people may want to pursue an area of special interest whilst working part-time. So I think both counties will really try our best to support you in that. There's also nothing to stop you pursuing portfolio working outside, and we can also give you signposting to other things that might not be called fellowship, but are perhaps quite similar.
Brilliant, thank you. So the 3 questions that we've got up on there are going to be the last 3 questions I asked, but most of the panel are quite happy to stay on and field any of the questions towards the end. So I'm going to do them in a slightly odd order. So Christine, can you answer a question about how long the partnership incentive might last? I'm laughing because it involves NHS contracts, and therefore it's always fairly short term when we think about these things.
I don't think we've been told how long the piece of string is, but it's likely to be about 2 years. It will depend, of course, on the number of vacancies. Certainly, I'm aware of quite a few partnerships who are intending to use it in the next few months. So look out for announcements. I don't think it'll be there forever, but certainly probably a couple of years.
I've muted myself again. Then I'm going to ask the second question on our list, which is Shaheen asks, is locoming bad for CV or career development? So let's chat to one of our partners. So Andy, do you want to take that one?
Right, okay. But so I think the main answer is no, but I think it depends on where you want to go and what you want to do with your career, really. When I look at people's careers, applying for salary posts with us, I think it's often healthy to see a period of locoming, and that people have tried different practices. Gives me a sense that if they're coming for a salary job, they are ready to settle down and so forth. I think if you had certain career aspirations, like maybe you wanted to go a very high-powered leadership route and be the chairman of the clinical commissioning group locally or something like that, then you might want to be taking some substantive posts in order to work towards that. But that's, of course, not everybody's cup of tea. So I think generally speaking, no, some of it definitely healthy, but depending on where you want to go with your career, you might start to want to sort of craft your posts and include some permanent positions, really. I don't know if other people have opinions.
I think most people realise that locoming is often a way of finding out what are more about practices, and appreciate that lots of us have varied portfolio roles, some of which will be the locum as the main roles, clinical roles, some partners, some salaried. So I think there's a range. So I'm just going to ask the last question because I think it was lovely. So can each of the panel, and I'll come to you one in turn, one piece of advice that the panel would give their former newly qualified self. So I'm going to start in the order on my screen. So James, if I can come to you first.
Well, I think that the piece of advice that I give my newly qualified self is to try things and keep all of your possibilities and all of your options open. I couldn't expect that in the couple of months before I qualified that I'd end up in the position that I am now. And with such a fulfilling, interesting and flexible role, it can often feel when you're in training like everything's a little overwhelming, but actually the nature of what we live in and the nature of the work that we are in means that a bespoke, interesting and something that is absolutely right for you career exists out there, and there's lots of places that you can not only access help but also shape help, and getting involved in these things has been an amazing part of my early career. That's what I'd say.
Great. Gemma.
Well, thank you. I think what a great question. I think succinctly, the advice I'd give to my newly qualified self is it will be fine. Don't worry, it's all going to be fine, because it will be. You're used to doing this. You've done this so many times, change jobs, and actually you're going to do it again, and it's going to be absolutely fine.
Great. Shella?
I'll unmute myself. So having only very recently qualified, I think my main advice would be to be confident in yourself and your own abilities. I think transitioning from a trainee to a qualified GP can seem really daunting. kind of transition. It was for me, but if you're confident in yourself and your abilities and your knowledge, and being open to opportunities, you really will enjoy the career that you carve out for yourself. Enjoy the ride.
Christine, please.
Yeah, I'd pick up the point that Andy made about keep your networks up. So keep talking to people and take advice, and don't be afraid to give it a go.
Great. Gail?
I'd say not many people know what's on page 412 of the BNF, so don't feel that you need to yourself. Ask questions, throw yourself into the things that you think look interesting, and just go for it. I think the thing is that general practice is a developing piece of work. So you may feel now that you know next to nothing about PCNs, but if that's something you're interested in getting involved with, go for it, because it's all changing. You know, I've been a GP 32 years and everything still changes. So just have a go. If it's not for you, you can get out of it without egg on your face and move on to something else. So ask the questions, throw yourself into the groups, and just make sure you keep some good peer and friendship support going around you. And be kind to yourself, be kind to the people that are around you.
Lovely. Andy? You're muted again.
I was just reflecting. People have already probably taken my top advice already. What I would say is I'm going to revisit some of the advice already given, and I think actually to just put yourself out there, take opportunities, see what happens, network with people, just meet people and have fun. Really, don't be too self-conscious. And what I was actually going to say was approach people as equals. So this is an interesting one, but people have a lot more respect for you if you show confidence, and even if someone is very high up in an organization, actually if you approach them, send them a direct email, go up and talk to them. People actually love that because they're people too, and that can open up all sorts of opportunities, and it's very rewarding. So I would say don't be afraid to do that. We're all GPs now, at the end of the day, and treat people as equals, even people that you might see as maybe being higher in you in terms of hierarchy. Thank you.
Jo?
Thank you. I think I'm reiterating a few points here, but I think one thing I was going to say was, back yourself as a new GP. You actually bring like new blood to a surgery sometimes, and you're in a really privileged position where you know lots of things in the local area that maybe the other partners or the other salaried doctors in your surgery might not know, and they've been kind of in their bubble of the surgery. So you're in a really privileged position. And the other thing I was just going to say was a bit more about the key contacts with your local colleagues. So that might be people like that you did your CSA with. So I still have like dinner and now Zoom chats with my CSA group, and I'm in a WhatsApp group for contraception in the local area. And it just means that you keep, don't kind of focusing, keep all those networks you've got, because they're really helpful when you have key questions.
Lovely. Zarina?
I think it's a lovely question. My advice would be, remember to look outside the GP practice box. Sometimes we just think of GP work and that's it. There's so much more out there, as all our speakers and their roles have demonstrated today. So remember to look outside that GP box. Remember you're a valuable asset, and use your skills and your passions, pursue those. And if there's something already there that you want to get involved with, great. But if it isn't there and you want to pursue it, take it up, become the lead in that and take it forward, because if someone else hasn't thought of it and you have, then it's going to be something that will help lots of other people. You can do anything is what I normally say to trainees, and often it's a case of doing it first and asking questions later.
Yeah, lovely. And I think my only piece of advice is that general practice is only one part of what you're doing at the moment, and your life will change and things will move, and general practice will take a smaller or a larger point depending on what else is going on in life, and make sure you get that work-life balance right. And that's been brilliant. I can see people there's lots of positive comments on the chat, so well done to the panel. I'm going to just hand over finally to Zarina just to close, but thanks all for being part of today.
Thank you, Susie. So James has popped up a Mentimeter, although the code isn't on the top, James, so I can't see the code for that. But I'm just going to say a big thank you to everybody. So thank you to all our audience and our attendees for being so engaging, for giving us such good feedback on the chat box and asking such brilliant questions. We hope you have enjoyed it and found it useful. And we can't all clap you, but I don't know if you can hear that, but that's a clap to all of you for working so hard in these circumstances. So that's for you. Second, I'd like to thank all our wonderful speakers who have worked so hard behind the scenes in the build up to this event. So thank you to Susie, James, Andy, Joe, Gemma, Gail, and Christine, who's been behind the scenes, for coming together and collaborating on this, for working so hard and preparing your presentation. So another round of applause for all of you. The event is being recorded, and I know we've had a bit of technical issues with the signing on. It's to do with the accounts that we've used to hold the webinar. So apologies, thanks for bearing with us. It's the first time we've done anything like this. For those of you who have colleagues who weren't able to access today's event live, there will be a link being sent out with the recording. And going forward, we'll obviously look at trying to create further events with a larger attendee numbers. I think that's everything that I was going to say. What's come across from today is how colourful and varied a career you can have in GP, in general practice, and that if we know one thing, GPs are good at adapting and being flexible, and I think that's really pertinent at this time in our lives globally. So just remember you're not alone, and there's lots of support there for you when you're going out into practice. So don't be afraid to ask for help and support if you need it. Thanks.
Will be the right thing to do. We do have a fairly niche question for you, Andy, on the Q&A box, if you'd like to take that.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure I have the correct answer really, but so quick question for Andy, your thoughts about GPs going into machine learning, data science as part of a portfolio career. So I admitted to having an interest in technology earlier. I think it's such a new combination of roles that I think you're probably going to have to be a bit of a pioneer, I suppose, yourself. Some of the fellowship schemes out there do offer some flexibility in terms of the sort of learning or qualification that you might do as part of that. So it might be possible to get something part funding, and often the people who run those are quite flexible. As long as you found a good quality, appropriate course to do, then that's something that might be helpful. I think so. I've been sort of developing an interest in technology and primary care as part of my portfolio career, and so far I've been going an interesting route that I've found rewarding and beneficial, and that's been an interesting route. In the world of podcasts and blogs and social media and YouTube, what it means to be someone with experience in a new field can be quite different, and actually just engaging with the other sort of thought leaders that are out there via these platforms, and by just sort of developing some content and contribution to the discussions yourself, you can actually open up a lot of opportunities to be invited to things locally and regionally to do with technology in healthcare. So in a way, I'd say be a pioneer. Don't be afraid if you're not immediately jumping into some sort of formal learning or course. Don't be afraid to to just make a meaningful contribution with whatever knowledge and experience you have, and and learn and develop a profile in that area. And you might be surprised what opportunities open up, and those opportunities might include those that you're looking for in terms of formally combining roles. I don't know if my details are going to be out there, but I've got a colleague who did some work with deep learning with Watson and IBM that was interesting, and he's a local GP, and I believe he did that as part of his fellowship, actually works in one of the GP surgeries, or at least combined it with it. So if we can get those details separately, I can perhaps provide more details and maybe an introduction. Hopefully that answers the question.
That's great, thank you. Gail, I think you'd taken a question. Did I see on the...
Yeah, it was just a question about sending out your CV sort of speculatively, really. Someone was asking about sending CVs out to practices for salaried roles. I would say yes, but make sure that it's personalised both to you in your expression of interest in that particular practice, and also make sure that if it's a practice you're keen on, you have in your mind a plan as to how you're going to follow up on that, because very few practice managers or partners with the responsibility for recruitment will spend much time, I think, unless they're particularly very short staffed at that moment in time, in making the first move. And I think Jo wants to come in on that point.
I was just going to mention about emailing practices. So if you've got email contacts for practice managers, then do email them across, but make sure you do personalise it, as Gail said. But also, if there's a practice you like a look of and that you've been eyeing up, or a couple, then even if they're not advertising roles, sometimes it's still worth kind of sending the CV and saying, oh, I really like the look of this practice. And I recently encouraged. I was looking for my ST3 actually, and I recently just messaged some colleagues to ask, did they know of any jobs coming up? And it was amazing how, in that just messaging 5 or 6 people, I created many job opportunities. So people are always looking and aren't advertising, or if someone that piques their interest comes up, they might be willing to look to employ someone else. So always send that out if you do really want it. I think my internet connection is unstable, so sorry.
Zarina,
is it possible?
Just to add a couple of things. So, following up from Jo, if you send your CV out to practices, they might not need you that month, but maybe 1 month or 2 months later, something will happen and they'll need to contact someone. And if they've got your CV, they're much more likely to contact you. And then a different comment. Colleagues on the webinar might not know, but EMIS, the computer system, was actually designed by a GP in Yorkshire who was working and realised that he could improve how things were. So the answer to the question about data science and AI, a lot of GPs have got many talents, of which medicine is only one of them. So it often fits very well as a portfolio that you use your other talents in other ways, as well as working as a GP.
Gemma, do you want to say something?
Yes, please, just really quickly. I think the other thing just to bear in mind, that I know Nottinghamshire, and I'm sure Derbyshire would do the same, the LMC would also be happy to, if you contact the LMC, then, like we said, even if there aren't jobs advertised on the website, if you tell the LMC the area that you'd want to work, they would be happy to contact the practices on your behalf. So that's a way of doing it if you don't have the connections or you're going to a different area.
100%, and certainly I know Nottingham do the same as Derbyshire. We do loads of work with practices, and we know when there are issues with recruitment or where there are things coming up in the near future. So that'd be a great kind of matching that could be done.